So I'm Elisabeth Arnaud.
Okay. Okay, we're good to go, huh? Yeah. Okay, so I should start, I'm assuming. I don't know. Yeah, we have people online, and I'm trying just to be sure exactly who we have online, on site and online with us. So let me just be sure I'm displaying the list here, and I can see everyone's connected, the spectators. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Clément Jonquet, and I'm here in Lecce with Nicolas Fiore. We are hosting the Ontoportal workshop. And in parallel of that Ontoportal workshop, as members of the Fair Impact project, we were excited about joining with Fair Impact and making a workshop on the topic of semantic artifact governance. So we convey different communities to give us their opinions and present their work that they have done related to governance. And that will be the subject of today. And so we have people here in Lecce also waiting and participating in the workshop. We have split the groups in two because not all of the groups, including the technical teams and all of that, are following the governance aspect. But we have representative of EcoPortal, of course, with Nicola, but also Ilaria, Nawel Karam, also from BioDiff Portal, Mark Mussen from BioPortal, that are also with us in the room. As soon as they talk, you'll see the camera turning around. So yeah, this is it, and thanks for joining us. And we'll try to do it in 2 hours. And I'm known to respect the timing that I'm setting up for meetings, so I'm joking about that. So we'll see how it goes. So Rita is changing the slide. Then we'll be. Could give a quick introduction about the workshop and the context with Nicola on my side, and then we'll move to the speakers. So yeah, we are in parallel of that Ontoportal workshop that we are organizing in Lecce. Nicola, you want to say a word about that or small?
Yeah, just a few words because I want to leave the time to the participants to present their experience in the governance of the semantic artifact. So these activities are the workshop has been held in following the activities of the task 4.1 of Fair Impact that actually we are leading as lifecycle sharing. I hope that the workshop will reach a very good result because we have a very large number of participants. The goal is to compare, to understand which are the main governance approach in Europe and around the world, and to compare it and to draft a guideline on this topic. I don't want to add more, leave the space to the participants.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, and thanks for organizing also the logistic. Also, I say thanks also to Rita and Trust IT for also helping us with the logistics of the Zoom, and of course the panelists and all of the participants. And a special thanks also to Nina that has been also supervising all of that in preparation of this meeting. So thanks, Nina. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. I said a couple of words on that, on why we are doing all of that. That's going to complement Nicola's approach. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. You have them with me here, yeah. So that was just to mention we had 2 public events in the context of the Ontoportal workshop. Yesterday, a public session. Some of you participate in the 2. And today, the semantic artifact governance workshop. The public session yesterday was also a way for us to present a little bit the initiatives of Ontoportal, which is in the context of Fair Impact, a technology that we use to work on semantic artifact and their catalogs in the context of Whole Package 4. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, this is really the title of the workshop now, which both more or less means that we can go to the next slide, Rita. Thanks for that. Yeah. So you know, in the context of EOSC, fair data has been identified as a pillar. This is one of the subjects that we are addressing in Fair Impact. with the objective of support the implementation of fair enabling practice, tools, and services across different communities. In the work package 4, our address is really different. In the project, we address different research objects like methods, software, publication. The topic that we have in work package 4 is semantic artifacts. And we all know that it's going to play an important role dealing with semantic interoperability in the context of FAIR. Next slide. So if that slide, I have a little lag there, so that's why I'm going to open them also on my side. Yeah. So the next slide is really about the importance of data governance. This is a citation from that Nina picked up, also demonstrating that, I mean, there is no success in companies and also in organization if there is no right handling of data governance. And so we think the data that is of interest for us is artifacts, semantic artifacts, and we think we also need to kind of learn from what happened in terms of governance of data. And that's the previous exercise we are trying to do in the task 4.1. Get inspired from people that have been working on data governance and see how those applies to semantic artifact governance. That's the overall context of our task. In the context of this workshop today, we're going to take a bottom-up approach, looking at what communities developing semantic artifact, multiple semantic artifacts have done. So that's really the next slide, showing us that we want to make an inventory of those semantic artifact governance model. That's our late deliverables in the context of the task 4.1 that Nicola mentioned, where that literally called review and produce governance models, with the vision that if someone comes to EOSC in the future, want to set up a semantic artifact catalog or address ontologies and vocabularies in the context of a given project, and they want to adopt right, appropriate, or relevant mode of governance, then they can look at the models that we have identified, analyzed, and set up and summarize in our task. Okay, well, next slide. It should be the next slide is just taking a few extracts from two documents that are important: the EOSC interoperability framework and the EOSC strategic governance research and innovation agenda. This is kind of justifying why we are doing that. Those notion of governance for semantic artifact has been identified in those key strategic documents as something EOS has to address. Because we are working in the context of the EOS roadmap, we are interested in those topics. Just one slide about the definition or what we mean by governance here. Really, we're going to see, that's the next slide. The governance aspect is really what decisions are we taking and who makes the decision on that. So that's what we would like to have our speakers also insist on. Yeah, that's the next slide, Rita also. And yeah, I'm speaking super fast because I know it's going to be crazy. So we need to keep in sync with that. So the management aspect of the governance is really how we implement those decisions. So what decisions, who make those decisions, and how they are concretely implemented or taken, and then actions are taken after that. So last but not least, we have the next slide is showing us the governance aspect, and then should I say the prism or and I present that, but Nina has identified that as a common prism that we can use for analysis of the different aspects of semantic artifact governance. So we'll look into the lifecycle aspect, the metadata, the quality access, and the principles that are used, all of that, and who's what is taking decision in terms of governance. And so our exercise after the workshop will be to take on the messages, the outcomes from the presenters today, and also try to make them fit in that common framework. So the last slide is presenting the different communities that we have invited today. The agenda is quite well packed, and to be honest, we were not expecting such a level of success, but I think the subject is so important for many of you that everyone around the table just said, yes, I want to say something, or I want to say something about our governance. We have, of course, identified some important ontology community that we know have already set up things like the Obo people, the Obo Foundry, or like the Crop Ontology Project, but we're going to see different examples of that. So yeah, those are the list more or less in that order. and that of presenters. And last but not least, this slide is a little hard to pass, but those are the questions, the guiding question we took and we discussed with the participants to kind of tell us things about their governance. So you see the principle that we have identified as the framework, the component that we have identified in the framework. They are here: context, principle, metadata, quality, access, lifecycle, and the notion of stakeholders and decisions. And we kind of propose a few questions to our presenters, telling them, look, guys, can you telling us, for example, at the quality, how do you assure the quality of your semantic artifact? What are the recommended good practice that you have? Are you following guidelines or high-level principles that you have established yourself or others? Do you enforce the reuse or import from other semantic artifacts? And how do you manage that? Or do you collect the feedback and issues from others? Those are important examples of questions. So maybe just please have a look at those slides, at those questions now. I'm not going to pass them all, but that's the prism also that we have taken also in the presentation with our presenters. Did I forget something? Or Nina, Nicola, help me if I forget something. Do you think we're good?
I think yeah.
Okay, well, let's run with the speakers. So the first presentation was a recorded presentation because Elizabeth and Marie could not make it today. So we have two presentations like that. We were maybe discussing about either skipping them and going in them to keeping them for the end. I was a little bit worried about that, or running them. It's up to you. Should have a great doubt about that. So do we go with the crop ontology presentation, or shall we skip it? Okay, I will say we should stick to the plan maybe and keep it. So Nina, are you loading it as we said, or we can hear the name but not Nicola? Yeah, should be good with that.
It's important. Cannot.
So, Clément, which presentation that we wanted to, we start crop presentation?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a confusion, let's stick to the plan. I should have not supposed to change the plan at the last minute. Sorry about that.
Okay, yes.
So
sorry.
you should you should be able to run the file.
Okay. Okay, I started. Do you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
No. Yes.
Okay, nice.
Yes.
Awesome. Good afternoon. So I'm Elisabeth Arnaud, and I will present the slides for the crop ontology governance framework in the domain of agriculture. Good afternoon. So I'm Elisabeth Arnaud, and I will present the slides for the crop ontology governance framework in the domain of agriculture. And the slides were prepared with Marie-Angélique Laporte. We are both from the Alliance Biodiversity SIAT in Montpellier. So the tool I will be talking about is called the crop ontology. It has been created in 2008 and is a framework to compose phenotypic traits and variables with their semantic relationships. It compiles today traits for 36 crops that were mainly provided by breeders, geneticists, and food scientists. The CO is developed by a community of curators and crop experts from the CGIAR, but also from the partners, universities, consortia. We have spontaneous submission of ontologies, and is available online under the CC BY 4.0 license, where you have a screenshot of the website and the list of crops is on the right. Sorry, yeah. A governance and stewardship framework was published in 2022, so relatively recently, to formalize better the way the ontology is governed and maintained. And the framework was developed with the input of committee of practice members. And the link here provides you the document online. Elements were published in a paper with Meda Devare as first author about governing agricultural data. 3 advisory groups were created for the crop ontology following this framework. The curator committee, that includes 3 curators aside the data steward, who is Marie-Angélique Laporte, and myself as the project coordinator. This is a forum to discuss any elements about the crop ontology or issues. The scientific advisory committee that includes scientists leading research projects using the crop ontology, and strategy advisory committee that includes scientists and informatics experts leading breeding databases like BreedBase or BMS, global information platforms like GEMS, and ontology registries like AgroPortal. A list of committee's members is available online on our website. Then the metadata we use are listed here. The name of the ontology, short description, curator name and affiliation, contributor and affiliation, version, and link to a peer review paper if any. This is requested to the person who will send us a trade dictionary for upload on our website. However, we don't use any specific standard for the metadata, which is a weakness. And our metadata are not machine readable. They are just published in the banner of the crop ontology. And the use of DOI for a proper attribution citation of the versions is planned and being discussed at the moment. For the quality, we provide several tools, the guidelines, which are detailed to guide scientists to use the trade dictionary template, and is also updated according to modification requested by the creators. The trade dictionary template in Excel with a README and an embedded quality control tool that can check errors or discrepancies, inconsistencies. A help desk available through mail and formed by Marie-Angélique Laporte and myself. An organized workflow that is published on our website that provides all the steps for a curator to submit an ontology, and the Planteum GitHub repository, of course, for the versioning. Priority setting of quality criteria for ontologies in agriculture was done with the committee of practice and was published in the paper indicated here. We do not import any concept in the crop ontology from other ontologies, but we map our concept to the spatial natural plant trait ontology, which enable to create an upper level entry point to the trait data that is useful for comparative genomics when someone wants to understand how a gene impacts a trait across species. The feedback we get are from the issues posted in GitHub by any partners or users, help desk mail, of course, the creator committee meetings, the surveys, and our community forum. For the access, we do not provide any formal terms and conditions about the governance and data steward framework that indicates some elements for the long maintenance of the ontology, and the license CC by 4.0, which is mandatory. All our ontologies are available through our API, which includes calls from the BRAPI breeding API, which is quite well known in the breeding world at least, and is developed by a community, in addition to some in-house calls. To keep the community noticed, we mainly use our community forum, GitHub alerts, emails, the CGIAR ontology working group that regularly meets, webinars, of course, and we also contribute to key conferences and publish papers. Promoting the use is also very important for activity for us, and the creators along the Alliance team are committed to provide solid support and maintenance to the proper ontology. The life cycle, so the Alliance team coordinates and provides ad hoc maintenance of the crop-specific ontologies, the maintenance of all the quality tools, including the website, creation of the GitHub repositories for the versioning and proposal writing. Curators' approval is requested on new terms to be added to their crop, which must be submitted through the template or the term request form that is online. Concept does not apply, that does not apply anymore, has to be flagged with a flag obsolete, label obsolete, and with the indication of the concept to be used, and those concepts are decided obsolete by the creators. All our terms are maintained in English. No other languages are currently supported. In the past we did, but it's very difficult to keep the update in all the languages. Sustainability, then the crop ontology being very important for breeding programs and particularly breeding databases, and is used as a standard by the breeding API, for example, or for MyAPI, then is usually supported over time by research and data projects that decide to use the crop ontology. So I listed some programs here that are mainly from CGIAR, the Generation Change Program, Climate Change Program, Roots, Tubers and Banana Breeding, Platform for Big Data in Agriculture, and lately the Digital Innovation Initiative. Then to that, you can add the Gates project for 1000 Farm that is bringing some on-farm traits to the crop ontology, and of course the important NSF awarded project called Planteum. And lately we have been receiving small grants allocated by partners to get our time for consultation and training. And then the stakeholders and decisions. So our priority audience is really the breeding data manager and breeding database developers and the people using digital field books, of course. The decision making is done according to several levels. The agreement to publish a new proposed ontology is, of course, the role of the project coordinator and the data steward. Then we allocate a crop code. The crop-specific ontology development and update is the responsibility of the creator with the crop expert group. The extension of the domain, for example, recently the food science domain, or removal of obsolete ontology we had to do, is done in consultation with the scientific advisory committee, the curator committee, and also some scientists leading the project supporting the crop ontology. The strategic technical development is done with the strategy advisory committee consultation, and we do consult our community through the forum, the surveys, and the webinars, as I already mentioned. The website improvement is the role of the Alliance team and is done mainly upon the feedback of the curators. The leaders of the project financially supporting the crop ontology are, of course, priority decision makers about the content with the guidance of the advisory committees. And this is an important point for the long term maintenance. Thank you for inviting me. And I wish you a very fruitful workshop and a very interesting discussion.
Well, that was a good job from Elisabeth Arnaud, and this is a group we know very well, and we are quite amazed about the work they have done in terms of governance. So we start very high for the others. You're going to have to show that you're good also, because those guys have published their governance guideline. They have recorded, not recorded, but inform everyone. So this is really already starting. I would say in the high in the requirements. So I mean, we'll not take any question here. Maybe we'll see a little bit with the other presentation how we do. So I've seen a question related also to the sharing of the content. All of that will be available. With you registering to the workshop, we'll also see exactly what we send out to everyone after the workshop. So in discussion also with the speakers. So let's go with Deepak. Thanks for being there and presenting, also representing the Obo Foundry. I mean, we all know that the Obo Foundry community has been like a major group of developers of ontologies, and have set up also some very important principles that are followed by the group, and had a major impact in the world of ontologies. So we are curious to learn exactly about how you present. I know some of it myself, but how you present that governance to such a workshop for that. Thanks, Deepak. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Clément, for that generous introduction. So the Obo Foundry started in 2003 with the goal of developing ontologies that are interoperable, logically well-formed, and scientifically accurate. Next slide, please. And it has been a long road since, right? And today the Obo Foundry is involved in developing standards. Sorry, do I control the slides, or do you have the control, Nina?
No, it's Rita that I have the control. Rita, can you pass the next slide, please?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's been a long road, and today the Obo Foundry is involved in developing standards for a unified representation of ontologies, developing infrastructure for effective and scalable ontology management, and creating Obo principles, which are basically the baseline for a lot of the things we do, and the tooling and all the standards we develop at Obo Foundry, and also building a community that facilitates collective growth and development of shared best practices. Next slide, please. So in addition to these aspects, the Obo Foundry is also a registry of ontologies, right? As of today, there are 184 active ontologies, and this includes ontologies from the biological domain, the biomedical domain, and domains that are adjacent to life sciences, for example, the environmental domain. And the Obo Principle 2 states that all ontologies must have at least one OWL product in RDF XML syntax. This is to ensure that the ontologies that are distributed are in the same syntax and is accessible. And of course, individual ontology providers are free to provide additional formats, be it OBO or OBO JSON, but at least RDF XML should be provided for all ontologies in the OBO registry. Next slide, please. And these ontologies are usually represented in places like the EBI OLS, the Ontology Lookup Service, the BioPortal, and OntoB. And of course, the individual ontology providers have to upload their semantic artifacts to these resources, but then Obo Foundry provides link out to these services for term lookup and exploration. And obviously, Obo Foundry does not host a service of its own for ontology exploration, because that is not within the scope. And there are plenty of well-recognized and represented tooling out there. Next slide, please. Speaking of metadata, when it comes to ontologies, I think with Obo Foundry considers two sources of information. One is the ontology itself, where you have metadata about the terms, and how those terms are interlinked with one another in the ontology. The other is the metadata provided by the ontology maintainers, which is stored in the Obo registry. And the latter being a YAML file, a YAML snippet in a markdown file with metadata elements that describe the ontology. So you have a file for gene ontology, you have a file for human phenotype ontology, and so on. And the file consists of metadata elements, and these and most of which are important when it comes to describing an ontology. And by capturing such metadata, we can make sure that ontology is sufficiently described for the users. For example, with the contact field, we require the contact person to be responsive, and the contact person should be an individual, not an organization. With the repository field, we keep track of the repository where the ontology is being developed. With the tracker field, we keep track of the issue tracker where the users can go for requesting new terms or trigger discussions that are specific to that ontology. And with the activity status, we are trying to capture whether the ontology is still being maintained. Next slide, please. And the OBO registry makes use of several metadata standards. So it uses RDF schema, the provenance ontology, the SCOS, the simple knowledge organization system, Dublin core, friend of a friend vocabulary, and also a small vocabulary called the description of a project. But that's just the metadata elements in the OBO registry. The OBO Foundry also has its own ontology to represent metadata that is captured as part of an ontology file. And this is the OBO metadata ontology, or OMO. And this includes annotation properties that can be used for terms and ontology metadata. Next slide, please. And so when it comes to quality, in OBO Foundry, we have principles where, and these principles are well described in terms of implementation, recommendations, examples, and counterexamples. But when we want to do automated checks for these principles, it becomes a bit more complicated, which is why we have something called the OBO dashboard, which operationalizes many of the OBO principles by running fixed computational checks. And so each principle has one or more checks. And for example, the dashboard would check whether the ontology has an open license, whether the usage is documented, whether the ontology is distributed in the right format, and so on. So here, what you see here is a dashboard just a week ago, where you have in the rows the ontologies and the columns representing the principles, and whether or not each ontology passes the checks for each of these principles. And the dashboard provides a report for each principle and the check that it's doing, and also what are the violations with recommendations on how you can fix them. And this makes the checks and the principles and the interpretation of the principles less philosophical, and it makes it easier to debate and discuss on how to move forward with it. And as of today, we do not require ontologies to pass all the checks, which is why you see some ontologies failing on certain principles. But this will change in 2024, where this would be a requirement where all ontologies pass the checks. And we are working with the ontology maintainers to provide concrete guidance on how to do so that they don't feel overwhelmed with passing these checks. Next slide, please. And in terms of another aspect of quality is the OBO Principle 5 states that ontologies should have a fixed scope. This means that ontologies are required to import terms from other ontologies, especially when dealing with terms that are outside the scope or the domain of that particular ontology. And this is important because we don't want ontologies to reinvent terms again and again. And in terms of user engagement and feedback, the first stop for users would be the OBO Discuss mailing list. And specific discussions are directed to the OBO Foundry issue tracker, where one or more ontology developers or maintainers can be brought into the discussion. And if there are discussions that are specific to an ontology, like new term request or updates, and these are directed to the individual ontology tracker, because that's where the discussion should be happening. And when it comes to discussions that affect multiple ontologies, we tag the necessary and the relevant ontology contacts and maintainers so that they're all part of the same discussion, and then subsequent discussions can happen at the individual trackers if need be. Next slide, please. And speaking of access, the OBO Principle 1 states that all ontology must be openly available to be used by all without any constraint. And with this principle in mind, ontologies are usually distributed via the CC BY or CC0 license. And that is a hard requirement for all ontologies in OBO. And as I mentioned earlier, OBO does not have its own service for ontology exploration, but it does encourage people or ontology maintainers to upload their semantic artifacts to services like OLS, BioPortal, and OntoB. And these services may have their own endpoint and APIs, which might be useful for users and the developers. And oh yeah, sorry, go ahead. And in terms of lifecycle, a lot of the questions that was posed to me earlier when I was preparing the slide seemed to be more relevant to an ontology provider. But OboFoundry makes recommendations on how to create and maintain ontologies. And in addition to these, the OboFoundry also provides tooling like the ontology development kit for managing the lifecycle of an ontology. For example, the ODK is a Docker-based tool that leverages other ontology tools like robot, OWL tools, DOSDP tools. And it is provided as a Docker image, and it has a set of executable workflows which can be used for managing the ontology's continuous integration, development, quality control, managing imports from other ontologies, and preparing new releases. Next slide, please. And speaking of governance, I think the Obo is governed by a volunteer team that consists of ontology maintainers and stakeholders. And this constitutes the Obo Operations Committee, which is divided into 3 working groups: the technical working group, the editorial working group, and the outreach working group. The technical working group is responsible for managing and maintaining the Obo website, the Perl system, the Obo dashboard, and other tools. And it also is responsible for managing and curating the Obo registry and the metadata in that registry. And it is also tasked with further harmonization of ontology and term level metadata across Obo ontologies. This is more of a broader kind of work, but it is something that has to be done as we're moving forward with the OboFoundry. With the editorial working group, they're responsible for refining the wording of existing Obo principles and also drafting the wording of new principles as they come along, and also refining and reviewing the wording of SOPs and FAQs and other aspects of the OboFoundry website. The outreach working group is responsible for monitoring and following up on discussions in mailing list, and also preparing documentation and education materials for the wider community. And is also responsible for preparing a quarterly Obo newsletter, which would focus on ontologies that are added as part of the previous quarter, announcements, updates, conferences, and webinars that can be useful for the wider community. Next slide, please. And we have also adopted what I would call is a role-based system. And this is something that we've done more recently, where each member of the Obo Operations Committee can have 1 or more roles. And for each role, there are a set of SOPs defined clearly. So for example, we have roles like the registry metadata steward, new ontology request manager, the website coordinator, Slack community manager, and so on. And each role has its own associated SOP, like how to deal with new ontology requests, how to review obsolete, orphan, or inactive ontologies, and so on. Next slide, please. And of course, speaking of roles and SOPs, new roles and SOPs are added as required, and existing SOPs are refined just so that it's clearer and the scope is well defined, so that there's no confusion who's doing what, especially because, you know, given it's a volunteer team, we're fairly distributed, and it can be difficult to coordinate sometimes in different time zones on whatever. And in addition to the Obo Operations Committee, we also have a governance task team, which advises the Operations Committee. It consists of members who are also part of the Operations Committee, but also outside of the Operations Committee. So there's a diversity of opinion, and the governance task team makes recommendations for improved governance within the OboFoundry. And this motivates better processes and documentation for us. For example, the codification of a code of conduct was something that was recommended by the governance task team. And the governance task team is right now making a new set of recommendations for 2023. And we will be working closely with these recommendations as we move into 2024. So yeah, I think we can open the floor for questions if I have time.
Thank you. That was the last slide. Yes. And so guys online, I mean, we are monitoring also the Q&A, so we can, I mean, some of us can reply also if there are different questions, and feel free also to ask questions over there. So they are up and ready when the presenters are finishing. Thanks, Deepak, also for presenting all of those aspects. I mean, we see that an established governance also goes sometimes with a level of commitment and engagement of the users that is stronger. I mean, I've seen you mention words like they must do that, or it will become mandatory on 2024, and things like that. And this is interesting to see that in your governance, the fact that your community has also become strong in terms of producing ontologies, now you can make it with some things that you consider also mandatory or not.
Right.
Do we have any quick question like for Deepak online? I mean, I like the idea of being able to at least ask one quick question for our speakers, even if we do them. The code of conduct. We have a small question about that. I mean, do you have a few info, a little bit more info about that, Deepak?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, with us, the code of conduct is something that's published in the Foundry website, and it describes how to be, welcoming, respectful, patient, and be careful, because ontology development and anything to do with ontology can be very contentious at times, and people have different opinions and strong opinions as well. And so we have to make sure that we are mindful of that, and that there is a set of guidelines or on how people should behave. I mean, not that we should tell them how to behave, but rather what is our expectation as part of engaging with the community, and also have a COC committee who can actually address concerns should some issues be raised by someone who is engaging with the Foundry.
Thank you, Deepak. And Clement, if I may step in, we also have 2 hands raised from the audience. So I'm not sure if we wait till the end of the event, or if you want to give opportunity to the audience to make the question verbally.
So I would suggest the opportunity to the audience to do it like through the chat, and then we keep some of all one at the end, if that's okay. So I think that would be the best way to keep it further. So I will encourage Roberto and Romain, which I know master very well do Zoom and the question things, to query up. And so Deepak will stay online and can reply also a little bit while keeping an eye on what's going on after that.
Sure, I'll catch up.
Okay. Okay, if that's okay with our speakers and with the audience, then we should process like that. And I hope we have a little time of discussion. Okay, well, where we are, the next slide, we should be around having our partners from the ISF presenting something. So we knew there was a work done historically also at the ISF. We struggle to find you, Paula, and thanks for joining us today and presenting. I say struggle because some of the people have changed in companies, but I think it was important for us here also the opinions that companies can have also in terms of internally speaking. We deal with ontologies, and that's also the policy that we apply in terms of managing them or the governance aspects. So thanks for presenting that part of the world. Let's say that part of the world. we can really listen to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I will try to summarize as fast as possible in the following slides the main details of our governance approach for ontologies. Next slide, please. Okay, but first of all, a little bit of background. BASF is the world's largest chemical company with 150 years of experience. Its business is organized in segments of chemicals, plastics, oil, gas, agricultural solutions, and so on and so forth. However, we have detected that in such a variety of segments, there is a standardization problem. We detected that mainly there were groups that were trying to solve the heterogeneity of data and also to trying to break silos. So for doing so, they were using ontologies. However, they were relying on ad hoc practices, which didn't allow us to discover ontologies that are existing across the company, don't reuse them, and these ontologies were not very well interoperable. Finally, all of it leads us to duplicate efforts due to the poor coordination across all the stakeholders. To solve all these issues, we have proposed the GOMO, which stands for the Governance Operational Model for Ontologies, which is a framework which defines a set of standards, best practices, and guidelines in order to guide the development and maintenance of ontologies in the company. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we are mainly working with ontologies at BASF, and they come from common needs of stakeholders, which are mainly translated into core ontologies. But we are also working with domain ontologies, which comes from the needs of operational divisions and also from specific domain community groups. At BASF, we have all the ontologies that we are developing hosted in one core catalog of ontologies. And as you can see here, we have an ontology lookup service, which we are using from the open source tool, which was developed by the EBI. So currently we have 73 ontology hosted there. And we have the opportunity, we leave the opportunity to the users to discover all the ontologies that are available in the company. Next slide, please. In terms of metadata, as we are a huge company, we have decided to collect all the relevant information that we need for understanding ontologies. That's why we have defined in GOMO a set of mandatory and optional ontology elements metadata that should be described. So basically, we are collecting information that is more or less well known by the semantic web community. And for defining all this information, we are reusing standard vocabularies for the metadata definition, such as, for example, we are reusing RDF, SCOS, DC terms, and so on and so forth. Some of the terms that we are using for specifying our metadata are described in the paper that was in that paper that was published in 2020. But for the BASF specific metadata, we have defined internal GOMO metadata vocabulary. So in that vocabulary, we define the terms that are not currently available outside BASF in order to describe, for example, who is the ontology owner. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of quality, GOMO have defined a set of 10 standards that guide the development and maintenance of ontologies. So these standards are grouped in by topics in this slide. And in summary, we have a standard way to define the structure of the IRIs of our ontologies. We have a standard for deprecate them. We are following a similar naming convention. We have a standard for defining the metadata. We also have a standard for defining how to control the versioning of our ontologies in Git-based repositories, and also standards for documenting ontologies and the structure of the documentation, and also what is the diagram notation that is preferred in the company. Therefore, to assure the quality of our ontologies, GOMO also has defined a set of quality assurance methods in order to ensure and to validate that the standards are fulfilled by ontologies. So once the ontology is ready to be deployed in a production environment, we execute a pipeline that allow us to test that the ontology passes all the QA. However, when an error is detected, the ontology is not allowed to be published, and then we generate a report with relevant information that can be used for fixing all the issues that have that the ontology have. In terms of feedback, as we are using a Git-based repository or Git-based version system, we mainly prefer to collect the issues in terms of changes or feedback from users using GitLab issue templates, which is the preferred way. But also we are using email or Teams channels where our ontology users can communicate with us in order to fix or to provide us feedback. Next slide, please. In terms of access, or depending on the content of ontology, we classify them in a specific confidentiality level. And depending on the confidentiality level, we assign a specific license to our ontologies to determine to what extent they will be accessible. In addition, in those cases where we enable third parties to consume our ontologies, we need to make explicit the terms and the conditions, but they need to be developed in a concrete license that is done by our legal department. So they are in charge of developing these kind of licenses for us. In terms of machine accessible endpoints for consuming our ontologies, we basically have one instance of a Virtuoso. And in addition, we have a specific REST APIs described using the Open API specification, where we have several calls that are ready to be consumed by our internal applications. To notify our users about changes or about follow-up meetings or workshops, we are using channel-based communication. So for example, in this screenshot, the notification of a new version of an ontology is shown. So this is the effective way that we have found in our company to communicate with our ontology users. Finally, in terms of sustainability of ontologies, as we are working with two kinds of ontologies, it will depend on the ontology how we ensure the sustainability. In the case of core ontologies, they have a common budget, which is supported by all organizational units in the company. That the budget ensures that there will be a permanent core team maintaining the ontology. And in the case of the domain-specific ontologies, is the domain experts, is the ontology owner the responsible for ensuring that there will be enough budget to maintain the ontology, and the maintenance will be relied on the domain ontology community. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of our life cycle, we are following a very basic life cycle, and more precisely in the part of the maintenance of our ontologies, we have defined it in GOMO curation activity, where we specify all the steps that need to be followed in order to include some changes in the ontology, and depending on the change, if it is a minor or major change, the workflow will be different. This is basically what are we doing in the maintenance part. And in terms of retirement of obsolescence of ontologies, we never delete ontologies because they must persist, but we are deprecated them. For doing so, we are using a specific metadata, as you can see here in this table. One of them is optional and is more intended to provide the specific IRI of the new term if there is a new term that is replacing the older one. In terms of versioning, we are using a Git-based environment to develop ontologies, and we are using the common practices from software development. So we are using the semantic versioning approach to coordinate on to follow what are the specific changes that the ontologies has. And then we include them in the part of the metadata. And regarding the languages, the English language is the preferred one, but we also are able to include different languages in labels and also in synonyms, as you can see here in this example of a real ontology that we have in the company. Next slide, please. Okay, finally, our governance model, GOMO, has as one of the main principles that BASF ontologies must have a community. So at each stage of the ontology lifecycle, there will be a set of actors that will have a specific roles that they need to follow in order to deal with all the tasks and the activities that are related to the ontology development and maintenance. It's important to mention that we have defined a racing matrix where we define who is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed at each stage. And finally, our governance models is maintained by the data semantics team at the ASF. Thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Paula. I made a private joke in the chat saying, you guys have been trained at UPM Ontology Engineering Group, no? I mean,
Yeah, I was a former PhD student in that group. Yes.
So we see a yeah, a good background in terms of ontology engineering in the way you also approach your governance. And so guys, please go ahead with those questions. I mean, I don't want you to answer now, but Paula, that would be interesting for you maybe to feature us a little bit in the chat or during the other presentation about the how
it's worth mentioning that this governance model was developed in collaboration with the ontology engineering group. So they were working with us in the development of this governance model. So it's a collaborative effort.
And so maybe it's not a question you need to answer right now, but maybe by written. Is that I'm really wondering also, how you guys do that internally for the ontologies that you guys develop internally, and also how do you include in that governance your participation or reuse of ontologies that are developed and built by people outside the world? And maybe can you give us a few lines about that in the chat, so while we move to the next speakers and things, Paola?
Sure. I will write it by chat.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other big question or remarks? Go ahead on the chat. I mean, I like to see that happening also, and still maintaining the flow there. So okay, the next feature will be, once again, here we saw something very mature with also decisions chosen, and have also other aspects in question on my side. Sophie will be telling us a few things about the approach at INAE and the way they manage vocabularies at INAE. So Sophie, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you some feedback from an institutional point of view. So I'm working at the INRAE, the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment. We are about 2,000 people working, and hopefully not everyone is producing semantic artifacts. But the direction I work in is the DIPSO, and it provides some support for researchers to work in the open science framework. And especially I'm working for support service that provides some guidance for researchers who want to work with the semantic artifacts. And that's what I will show you how we work. Next slide, please. Most of the semantic artifacts are produced by researcher teams in the context of projects or applications, and they are dedicated to specific questions. Here I put some examples so you can see that we have ontologies, but also thesauri or terminologies. And there are also some science support services like mine, who can produce semantic artifacts too. And I am in charge of the INRAE thesaurus, and I'll tell a little words about it later. So where are the ontologies and other semantic artifacts that we produced? Potentially they can be everywhere, as the authors are free to choose what the repository they want to use. But most of them can be found in AgroPortal and BioPortal, because they are really in the scope of our thematic. And we also have some terminologies and glossaries in a French terminology repository called Lothair. And we also recommend that our semantic artifacts are at least documented or recorded in the generic national repository recherche.data.gouv, so that they can be more visible at a national level. but my service recommends different open semantic artifact dedicated repositories that are listed here. And I added a reference to a web page where we explain our users how and where to host their semantic artifacts. Next slide, please. Regarding metadata, we recommend minimal metadata that are listed here, but it's quite conventional. The name, the authors, and different contributors to the resource. We try to have our people use identifiers, global identifiers for them and for their organization. We need a contact, of course, and small description of the semantic artifact, version information, and a license, like any other data that we produce. But in fact, all these metadata, this is only a recommendation, as we really are dependent on the repositories we use to share our semantic artifacts. As we work with the Agro portal, of course, we are really fond of the metadata for ontology description and publication ontology, and try to contribute as much as we can. And we also use DCAT, DataSite, DDI, and Dublin Core in the National Recherche Data Gov repository. For additional metadata, of course, if we want to be fair and have good scores for using fair assessment tools, we recommend our authors to add as many metadata as possible. Now, quality. We can only provide good practices. We don't have a strict policy regarding quality, as the content of the ontologies is really controlled by the experts, the domain experts who produce them. But we try to make them aware of existing good practices and guidelines. We also recommend them to reuse Cheers semantic artifacts, but it's still difficult. I have to mention it here because there is a lack of trust in the semantic artifacts that are maintained by other people. But I know that the community is organizing to make things better. So we'll try to keep this line. For technical and syntactic quality, I mentioned here some tools that we use in my service and recommend to researchers who develop semantic artifacts. Next slide, please. Rita, can you change the slide, please? Thanks. Now, access. We at INRAE, we are under the umbrella of the national policy, the Plan National pour la Science Ouverte. So we have to stick to this as much as possible, and we transcribe this national policy into our national institutional data policy, where we mention FAIR and also that data should be as open as possible and as close as necessary. But for semantic artifacts, there is quite a consensus here that they should be licensed using the licence ouverte état lab, and which is equivalent to the CC BY 4.0. And for technical access, I distinguished metadata from the semantic artifacts themselves. There are APIs and Sparkle endpoints to query, depending on where the semantic artifacts are hosted. We know that our semantic artifact authors use, for some of them, use Git or emailing for communicating with their users. For the thesaurus in RAE, we have a website to communicate the changes, and we are doing some emailing to inform our users when there is a new release. And for regarding sustainability, this is a good question, because for the ontologies and thesaurus that are produced in the research units, we have no guarantee that they will be maintained. At DeepSo, we only guarantee that they are accessible, but we can't do more, as many semantic artifacts are produced in the context of projects, and the question of sustainability is tricky here. Next slide, please. No life cycle. Here I only give the example of the thesaurus in RAE, as there are many different practices in the teams who make scientific ontologies. We allow users to ask for, to request for modification in the thesaurus, and the editorial committee, which is made of about 15 person, can process these requests, working with domain experts whenever needed. And we have editorial guidelines, regular meetings, task groups, shared spreadsheets to discuss, and also we use Workbench to edit the thesaurus. We use SCOS, OWL deprecated. Sorry, there is an error here. This is OWL deprecated to mention obsolete concepts, and whenever they are replaced by another one, we use the DC terms property. We have approximately 3 releases per year, so this life cycle is can be restarted between each release. Next slide. Here is just the recap of how to take decisions. What we use for this. Rita changed the slide, but most of the decision is in the hand of the ontologies authors, who are really autonomous on their processes, and what we do is providing them more and more guidance, relying on projects like Fair Impact to feed our activity. So I think that's I finished. Thank you for listening.
That's finished, Sophia. Yeah.
Yes.
The slides move a little further after that.
Yeah.
And while we switch maybe between Rita and Baptiste and Baptiste just wanted presentations. So I just wanted to be sure also everyone will monitor. So we have the chat from Roberto where we could put some info also there. Thanks for presenting all of that. I mean, we see the different perspective here also with your work presented, Sophie, more like a support that can be provided to labs and groups developing ontologies inside AdInRAE, which is all different also from what we've seen also in other groups saying, look, you should do that, or that's the way we participate in our community or things like that. So it's also interesting to see that perspective. Okay, well, let's listen. Let's go to Baptiste, bringing you a little bit in the air.
Okay, can you hear me? And is the slides showing well?
Yes, and yes.
Okay, so let's go. So here I present the way the governance of the semantics is managed within the IVOA, the International Virtual Observatory Alliance, which is, I would say, the main international alliance for astronomy interoperability. And I'm speaking here as the chair of the semantics working group. And yeah, by the way, I'm from the Observatoire de Paris in France. The context and principles. So the goal of the IVOA was from the very beginning, in the beginning of the 2000 decade, the interoperability. So really the core, the driver is the interoperability between tools, databases with protocols, standards, schemas. So the framework is that, and so it covers a set of services, as I show. And we have two types of semantic artifacts. We have schema, we call them data models, and control lists of terms that we call vocabularies. So all those are developed by working groups in the frame of the IVOA. Sometimes, but not so much, we are inspired by the external work, but many of my colleagues, older colleagues, they like to reinvent the wheel, and unfortunately sometimes. But the thing is that it works within our own world, so this is something that is quite efficient. So where to find this information? So basically, it's web pages with links. There is no searchable catalog for semantic artifacts at this point. So the schemas are under the URL I propose, vocabularies are there, and specifications, documents are also behind the web page. So our schema, most of schema are described with an overarching data model, which is a schema of schemas. This is something that is rather recent, but so everything is very well structured so that interoperability can work between using our protocols. And then, so the vocabularies are really, this is the core point, are there to define the control lists of our standards so that machines to machine or users or clients know exactly what the terms of the protocols are meaning when a query is issued. And then the findability, the accessibility, and the reusability are byproducts of that. And in the frame of the IVOA, I think this is working quite well. But as I say, we are using our own standards, and we use very little of the outside world, probably because we started in the early 2000s, and so it was one of the pioneering communities. But since the technology is there, it's difficult to make changes in in an environment where there is not so much funding to rewrite every code of each of the providers in the world. So most of our vocabularies, so this is something which is quite interesting, has been recently rewritten with SCOS and OWL, so that they are now available in RDF-XML, so we can start to play with ontology systems and engines, but this is really a starting prototyping that we have. So on this quality part, so to add new terms, change or deprecate terms or concepts, so we have a way to go, and it is always based on consensus, either on the working groups of data models for schema or semantics for vocabularies. We need, in order to go to recommendation or adoption, to have several implementations, several examples of use for vocabularies or several implementations for schemas. and interoperability validations with validators. And then there is an IVOA decision process that is shown on the right-hand side, starting from discussion and notes, working draft, proposed recommendation, go to technical coordination group to decide on with an RFC, request for comment period. Then sometimes it goes back to the working groups and then it's adopted after some turns. But at every step, the consensus is really the rule. If there is no consensus, we don't go forward. For vocabularies, we have documents that are describing the process. For most of them, we have a process called VEP, Vocabulary Enhancement Proposal, where people can post in the mailing list proposed or new terms of or modification of terms. And then there is a discussion, and the chair of this, the manager of this vocabulary then updates the vocabulary and proposes it to the technical group committee. For one list, we have a specific advisory committee, scientific advisory committee, which is managing the terms, answering to questions, proposing answers for people not really sure about using the vocabulary. So these are specific things that we have. But as I say, we are a bit in our own island for vocabularies as for now. We have a few prototypes for using external resources like the IAU Thesaurus or a prototype of observatory names based on Wikidata, but it's really starting now. And how we collect feedback. So there is this VEP, Vocabulary Enhancements Proposal process. We have mailing list. Our documents are developed on GitHub repositories, so we can post issues on those GitHub repositories to update the documentation and the standards. And we have our twice a year our IVOA meetings where we discuss face-to-face all this. About access, the licensing is mostly very clear. Vocabularies are CC0, so open license with no constraint. The documents are CC BY. For the schemas, it's not sure. Usually it's associated to a document, so it's the same license, but there is no license specified in the schema document itself at the moment. So this is something we have to work on. About being machine accessible, for our vocabularies, the identifier could be resolved if we know which vocabulary we use. So usually in a schema, if we know from the documentation which control list we use, here, for instance, I take the timescales control list, then the value is UTC, then we know how to resolve it to this URI, which is where you can find the definition of this UTC timescale. At the moment, we have an Onto-Portal prototype in which we have integrated all those vocabularies, and they are machine accessible there this way, but it's not integrated in any workflow at this time. It's really a prototype. We don't have any notification plan in place to tell a new term is here. Basically, the people who are involved they know about it because they are in the mailing list. There is an IVOA newsletter that could be used for that. This is something that we want to investigate. Thanks to this discussion, when I discussed with the chair of the technical coordination group, we said, okay, we should look into that. And then for the sustainability, it's really community involvement. This is one of the way the IVOA is working, and by chance it works. There is no dedicated funding at IVOA level, at the Alliance, International Alliance level. There's only project level locally in countries or institutions, so funding that are used to do this work. So the life cycle is a bit, I already mentioned it a little bit, but so for the maintenance of the vocabulary, there is this vocabulary enhancement proposal with where you can have new terms, update definitions, or propose to deprecate. Mailing list is the place where the discussion happens until there is consensus. Then we update the list and we ask for to the technical coordination group to endorse this change. And this is a decision. This is a discussion that is not within a working group, but here it's all the chairs of all the working groups that are discussing about that until we decide it's fine. For the schemas, there is a strict versioning system with a release process. So we start with GitHub issues and mailing lists, write a new version of specification, have an RFC request for comment at the technical coordination group, and then we adopt. Either we go back if it's not okay, and we adopt. For the versioning of the vocabularies, at the moment, and this is something we should also work on, it's only based on the release date. So the previous example of the UTC timescale, actually the full URI in the unique one includes this date, and there are other definition, older one with older releases. There is only one vocabulary that is versioned, and retiring a term is very difficult, very rare, because it's very difficult to know if it's really not used. For schemas, there is no formal retirement process or obsolescence process. Usually, the latest major version is used, implemented in tools, but we tend to maintain the older version of the protocols or the schemas, because there are services that are still working with very old versions, which will never be updated, and then we don't want to cut these out, because this data is worth keeping it in the system. And about the language, all the labels are in English, and so are the terms. We don't plan to have multilingual thing at the moment. Stakeholder and decision. So the stakeholders are all the many people that are involved in the working groups. It means it's any people interested. Software developers for clients, data distribution framework developers, research scientists, data curators, representative of science data centers, space agencies, whoever. The technical coordination group is composed of the chairs and vice chairs of the working group. Every 3 years, those chairs are renewed. And then there is on top of it the executive committee, which is composed of the national or regional virtual observatory associations. And in addition to that, we have a committee on science priority that is collecting the requirements for communities. So all this ecosystem layered from the bottom to the executive committee is taking the decision, but it's exclusively bottom up. All the decisions are coming from the working groups. There is no change that is coming from the higher level, and it's really consensus based. And so I just put the link to the document of the IVOA that explains this decision process in details. I think that's it. Yes, so I can stop the sharing.
Baptiste, thanks for this presentation and giving us that tool. The more I hear about what you guys have been doing, the more I realize you guys have been structured and for years apparently. So the more I dig into so now that's really interesting that you've been able to present that to the group, including that process of decision, and thanks for providing the acronym of what is it, vocabulary enhancement proposal.
Yeah, this is based on the Python enhancement proposal,
Okay.
The PEP.
Well,
so the guy is was very keen about that. So we implemented basically the same thing.
Okay, because I mean the OBO people would have, or the crop ontology would have say term request or term proposal, change request. But that vocabulary enhancement is a larger term, but that we haven't seen in before. So that also demonstrates that some things we've done also a little bit on your side that we are not necessarily aware here. Okay, well, thanks for keeping it short. Also, the discussion is still going on also a little bit on the chat, so we'll keep it like that. And to be honest, we start realizing we might not be able to make it up to the end without keeping you all night. So we'll get things a little bit organized, also reorganize also on our side. Okay, let's continue. We are 1 minute before 18. Now I will take over now. So it means that we are going through the sound that now Elizabeth was in the room. So if you stop presenting now, you can go ahead and present your stuff. And if you have the Java on your side, you should be able to talk over.
But I cannot share my screen.
She cannot share the screen.
Nina?
Nina or Rita.
Oh,
Can
Nina
you
or
hear me?
Rita should be able to give you the right access because that's not our Zoom, sorry,
Okay.
to share the screen. Oh, should I do that? I should be able to do it maybe. Yes, sorry.
Panelist. Yeah.
Sure. You guys don't have access to allow that. You don't need it. Tu vois pas le share button.
Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah, and she's not co-host, and I don't see. I can't make her co-host.
Okay,
Trying
then
to.
you can share the ones from the Google Doc. It's
Do you
fine.
want me? I can share if I'm trying to share my screen. Give me a moment. I'm putting directly
Yes.
on the presentation mode. Okay, it's working again. Is this correct?
Yes.
No, it's number 6, biodiversity.
Number 6. Give me a second. Okay, presentation mode. Let's start again. What about now?
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
thank you. So my name is Noel Kam. I'm from the Institute of Applied Informatics from the University of Leipzig, and I will be presenting our governance in the project NFDI for biodiversity. Next slide, please. So we are a consortium of 50 partners organization, and we are part of a bigger umbrella that is the National Research Data Infrastructure in Germany, NFDI. Our vision is in infrastructure to empower data sharing and data-centered projects. We have different partners from different research institutions, museums, IT services, and so on. And our goal is to offer not only data, but also services that our partners and also tools that our partners are developing. And we call it Research Data Commons, RDC, and it will be also used by many other NFDI consortia. So that our users basically can concentrate on their research. Next slide, please. So what kind of semantic artifacts do we have? We have taxonomies of living organisms. We have metadata and data standards like ABCD or ETS, the ecological trait standard. And we have also some geological ontologies. And when I say we, it's our partners like the Botanical Garden, Marum, the Institute of Marine Biology, and SNSB and DSMZ. So, and those semantic artifacts could, yes, are basically not necessarily in a semantic web format. They are available in databases. Some of them are also in Excel tables, and some of them are our ontologies. So I will talk about all this, but for each type is a different governance. Those are all hosted on our instance of Ontoportal called BioDiff Portal. And basically, the landing pages and the linked data deployment is still in the former, like the historical portal we had that was called GF Bioterminology Service. So I illustrate here the pages that like the dedicated page for the ecological trait data standard for example, that is available on our website, and also the linked data deployment that is where we assign URIs to the semantic resources. Next slide, please. So concerning the metadata, I illustrated here on the ETS ontology. Basically, we have different standards. Yeah, we use again also DC terms, OWL and SCOS annotation properties, and we require the ones I have here in asterisk, like the title, description. Important is also license and a version IRE for the actual version of the ontology. Next slide, please. For quality, so there is a difference between the taxonomies that we transform and the OWL ontologies. So for the transformed ones, we have a standard transformation pipeline for the taxonomies into OWL. And for that, basically, we assure the quality of the format and the content of the OWL ontology, but the content quality is assured by the project partner developing the taxonomies themselves. For OWL ontologies, we have validation through a reasoner. We enforce release notes and publication of ontology changes. So what happened between versions of the ontology. We develop best practices for reuse of top level or reference ontologies, like mapping to geonames, for example, for the geographical ontologies. And we have through the ONTO portal, we can use the fairness assessment or FAIR that have been developed by AgroPortal. For feedback, we collect feedback from GitHub issues for the OWL ontologies, and the taxonomies had a specific workflow for getting feedback from the users, and we plan to have a centralized workflow through BioDiff portal also for the taxonomies. Next slide, please. So for access, the license is CC BY, and we have also some custom licenses for domain-specific context. Access, we have a Sparkle endpoint and linked data deployment, as I mentioned, through the GF Bioterminology service, and the download and browsing of the ontologies is possible via BioDiff portal. Notifications, we do it through mailing lists, and for sustainability, basically it's institution and national agencies funding from the different partners. Next slide, please. Concerning the life cycle, so for the maintenance, basically for the taxonomies, it's locally done by the institution's editorial committees. And we plan to have terms of suggestion for workflows via BioDiff portal, also to the taxonomies. And for the OWL ontologies, we have periodical releases of the OWL versions on GitHub. Retirement and obsolescence, then the term status is changed and the link to the accepted one is maintained. This is like typically what taxonomies do. For the versioning, we use for the taxonomies release dates, because we take like timestamps of the taxonomies, and for ontologies we use semantic versioning. Languages, we have English and German, and some of the geographical ontologies have also many alternative labels in hundreds of different languages. Yes. Next, so stakeholders, we have for the taxonomies, their editorial committees. for the task groups, like the Sedgwick ABCD task group for the ABCD ontology. Also ontology managers for some specific ontologies, and expert feedback from the expert community. Concerning the decisions, then it's the editorial boards of the taxonomies, and through a consensus of task groups. Yeah, that's it, I think, from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nawal. Yeah, and we can see feature the brand new BioDiff portal, which is part of the approach also there. Okay, well, I'm used to do the transition now, so and I need to find a new way to do this one. Well, let's move to you, Henriette. Henriette, you starting or Zoe starting? You guys are doing at two voice, I think. Yeah?
Yes, I'll be starting.
I'll do it. Give me a second.
Yeah, that will be number 7. So we chat with Maxime. Also, we're supposed to do the last one. We're not sure we're gonna do that last one, but we'll see.
I believe it should be working now. Okay.
Yes, I can see it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us and for allowing us to give you some feedback on our experiences at EMBL EBI. Next slide, please. So who are we at EMBL EBI? EBI is a European Bioinformatics Institute, and we are part of EMBL. EMBL is the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. We are an international organization spanning more than 20 countries, and we are a trusted source for biological data. So our main mission is to translate this data to knowledge. So the data that we have is at least about 400 petabytes of data, spanning 40 open access databases. And to manage this transition from data to knowledge to being actually valuable for medicine, agriculture, society, and industry, we have to integrate the data across these databases. And the way we achieve that is through the introduction of the EFO, the experimental factor ontology. But in doing that, what we've realized is that even though EFO is used extensively throughout the EBI, it is not addressing all the use cases for EBI, and we end up actually using at least about 30 other ontologies within EBI. So what we've done is to actually allow our users to be able to access these ontologies in a single place. That's why we've created the ontology lookup service. So that allows us to index these ontologies in one place and allow our users to search for terms on the ontology lookup service, and then to also be able to navigate these ontologies as they need to. But also because we are using a number of ontologies, we often find that we want to map from one ontology to another ontology, and for that we introduce the OXO service, our ontology mapping service. Next slide, Zoe.
Thanks, Henriette. So I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction into what EFO is. So EFO, or the Experimental Factor Ontology, is an application ontology that's available for browsing in OLS, as Henriette said. And it represents experimental variables based on existing OBO resources. And we also offer custom extensions that cater to EMBL EBI's databases and their specific needs. And it's comprised of 5 main concept areas. So the largest area is diseases, traits, and phenotypes, which makes up almost half of EFO. These are traits like abnormal behavior, heart disease, and they're imported from ontologies like the human phenotype ontology and Mondo. Then we have anatomy, development, and cells that makes up around, I think it's just under a third of EFO. And they're terms like digestive system, lung, epithelial cell, that kind of thing. And they're mostly imported from Uberon and the cell ontology. And then we have assays, which is terms like ChIP-seq. We have measurements, that is terms like blood pressure change measurement, and compounds that contain terms like chemical entities and drugs, which each make up less than 10% of EFO. And that these terms are imported from Go, Kebi, OBA, and many others. Next slide, and back to Henriette.
So our ontologies on the OLS are all L2 ontologies based on Artefact and L. And RDF and L2 are both W3C standards. For our ontologies on OLS, we don't have substantial requirements. The bare minimum requirement that we have is that your ontology must have a pool where we can download your ontology. But then you also need to have some unique identifier for your ontology. This is like an abbreviation or a prefix, and that is used in our pipelines. And then we also actually encourage the ontologies to have a license information, title for the ontology and description of the ontology, but these things are not enforced by OLS, and we do not make any changes to ontologies. So our requirement is basically that this ontology will be biological related, but other than that, we don't have substantial prerequisites. Then also for mapping between ontologies, we have the OXO service, and for that we are rewriting OXO at this moment to actually be SESAM compliant. SESAM is a standard to be able to map between ontologies. Next slide, back to Zoe.
Yeah, so ensuring the quality of an ontology is a big part of ontology maintenance, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So in order to do so for EFO, we have continuous integration set up on GitHub. So we consistently run our release queries over every single commit that's pushed to GitHub. So that includes running tests like ensuring no obsolete terms remain in the main hierarchy, or there's no terms with duplicate labels. And when we push these commits to GitHub, we actually ensure that we're pushing to a branch and making a pull request instead of pushing straight into our main branch. So that stops our main branch from ever being unstable. And at each release, we run local tests as well as the continuous integration tests that are run when we push to a branch and then a pull request. And those local tests are part of maintaining an ontology with the ontology development kit, as well as some custom tests that we've also added for EFO. When it comes to good practices, we ensure that we follow OBO Foundry principles where possible. It's not entirely possible, as some of them aren't applicable to an application ontology like EFO, but we try not to deviate from the principles where we can help it. And we also put a lot of effort into importing from domain ontologies rather than recreating them in the EFO namespace, because we're not experts and we'd like to get the information from domain experts and not reinvent the wheel. We also encourage, when we have term requests, to include cross-references and synonyms in the actual request, because EFO is used by multiple resources to power their search interfaces. So especially synonyms are really useful for being able to find exactly what you want through these search interfaces. And we also ensure that we're giving back to the ontologies that we import from in order to enrich them and improve the domains as a whole. So whether that's adding new synonyms that someone's requested in EFO, we then send that on to the domain ontology, or including new cross-references, or assisting in taking part in different workshops and things like that. So the ontologies that we import from are all imported dynamically, which means that once they're updated at the source. So for example, if Mondo changed a label, this would then be reflected after that Mondo release in EFO immediately. So this reduces the risk of EFO being out of date and not in sync with these source ontologies. And in order to get feedback from our users, we find this really important for improving EFO. And we have more than 50,000 terms in the ontology that span multiple different branches. So noticing any errors that aren't picked up by the tests is really difficult. So we have open channels of communication with our EFO users mailing list and our GitHub issue tracker. So we're able to keep discussions going and invite new people in to give their expert opinion. And we also inform our users of any major changes and releases via the mailing list and our GitHub. Next slide, back to Henriette.
Next slide. Yeah, that's the correct one. Thank you. So with regards to licensing, EFO, OLS, and OXO are all provided under the Apache 2 license. And as mentioned already through this workshop already, is that OLS, EFO, and OXO are extensively used in the community already, both in non-profit organizations as well as in for-profit organizations. With regards to communication, particularly community-wide communication, most of this happens via mailing lists. We also have on occasion user days when there's particular aspects that we want to explore with our users. Then we will arrange a specific user day with specific focus. Funding for our sources, for our EFO, OLS, and OXO are all from external sources mainly, but occasionally also have it funded from internal funds. And this is in part also because EFO, OLS, and OXO are heavily used within EBI itself as well. Next slide, and back to Zoe.
Thanks. So as I've said, EFO is very user-driven, and it relies on a lot of term requests from curators in order to expand the hierarchy to fit the data. So when a term request is made, we actually have quite a process. So we look to see if the term exists in any other ontology using services like OLS. And if not, we're able to create that term in EFO with a unique identifier that can be used for term annotation. So in this case, we'd request information about the term from the requester. At minimum, we ask for a label and a parent term so we can actually put it into the hierarchy. But we kind of encourage a little bit more information. So this includes a written definition where we'll credit either the source if it's come from, say, a publication or a database, or we can include the ORCID ID of the requester. We also ask for any existing cross-references to external databases, terminologies, ontologies, etc. And we ask for any synonyms, again, to help with that search interface of our users. If a term actually exists in an ontology, then we can import it directly into EFO if it's one of the ontologies that we import from. And that, again, reduces the amount of duplication. If the term exists in an ontology that we don't import from, we actually have a slightly strange way of doing it. We actually create the term in EFO with a unique identifier and duplicate the source term, while also making sure that we have mappings to the original and a comment stating that this is the case. And these mappings are really useful for other services like OXO, for example, so we can find different mappings. Due to the release cycle of databases at EBI, we release EFO every month on the 15th of the month, so our users know, unless the 15th falls on a Friday, a weekend, or a bank holiday. In that case, it's the next working day. So then everyone knows when they can then update their databases. Any terms that require obsolete go through a few mandatory steps, such as prefixing the label with obsolete, adding the relevant annotations like al deprecated true, obsoleted inversion, term replaced by, and reason for obsolescence. And every term that's obsoleted must have a replacement term or have a specific and very clear comment as to why there's no replacement term. So that avoids breaking any user pipelines and databases. And finally, we don't include any extra languages when we're creating labels, etc. any extra languages that come into EFO apart from English are coming from imported terms if they have additional languages. Next slide, please, and back to Henriette.
Okay, so then for our changes to EFO, this is mostly driven by curators and domain experts. For OLS and OXO, this comes mostly from developers, but we also actually have a lot of feedback from curators and domain experts. Prioritization is mostly from our funders, but then also we consider our larger community, and is that if there's a ticket coming out that is affecting the larger community, we will address that even if that is a prioritization that is in conflict with our funders. Occasionally, our PI makes direct decisions, but for the most part, decisions are made within our different teams. That's all from me for this session. I want to thank Zoe for being willing to help me out here, because I know our tools very well. I know EFO from as much as a programmer can do that. And I really appreciate her input on EFO in this regard. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. So we had a deep also view at one specific ontology. I mean, of course, in the context of EBI and the services developed by EBI being supporting of that ontology, but it's interesting to see the level of importance that governance can take from one specific project. And I think the AgroVoc presentation also coming at the end, we'll probably don't do it, we'll record it. We have a record version of that, so we'll share you the link. Is also showing and so it's something a little special, because most of the rest of the presentation were like about a little bit more groups of ontologies also. Okay. Maxime, do you think you still have a little time to make it? So Maxime is our last speaker. I mean, we have also a presentation from AgroVoc, Imasubira, but this is recorded. I'm not going to hold you online for presenting you a 10-minute recorded presentation. So, but we'll make that material available. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we'll compile all of that, because with all the slides and all the videos, and the meeting going on with 30 persons in Lecce, so it's hard to manage all of that. But we'll come back to you with the restriction we have info of who has been participating in the workshop. So Maxime, you want to go ahead and we'll do a conclusion word at the end of that?
Yeah, I'll try to stick in 10 minutes, something like that, mostly. Yeah, so overview the slides. The idea here is, if you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, by the way, I'm Maxime Lefrançois, associate professor at École des Mines de Saint-Étienne in France, one school of the Institute Mines Telecom. I want to talk here about the governance of the ETSI SAREF suite of ontologies. So ETSI is the European Telecommunication Standard Institute. So SAREF has been first launched by a study commissioned by the European Commission. TNO in the Netherlands started working on that in 2013. Then the publication, so it was decided that the publication of the first version would be made by ETSI and governed by a Smart M2M technical committee there. So there is a technical specification document for SAREF, and in its version 1 published in 2015, and soon after they decided to make different extensions of SAREF, which by the way stands for Smart Applications Reference Ontology now. So different extensions for verticals. So one for energy, one for environment, one for building. So that led to another project funded directly by the European Commission at that time, and more task forces funded either by the European Commission through ETSI or by ETSI directly. Gathered some teams of experts, mostly academics, in the development of other extensions, also, and that's where I enter the picture, on the development of the framework and the workflow for streamlining the development of Saref and its extensions, publishing everything on a portal following best practices, etc. So that's the STF 556 that you can see here below. After in 2020, STF 578, the Saref development framework and workflow, and 2 new task forces are now ongoing, where we want to consolidate all the existing Saref extensions and Saref core based on patterns now, because we soon realized that having every extension developed by a separate team of experts actually led to a lot of modeling discrepancies in the Saref suite of ontologies. All these extensions, in any case, we have first a study before developing them that consists in trying to see what are the standards in a certain vertical that we want to take into account. What are the use cases? We are in touch with different industrial associations and companies, and there are different currently running large-scale pilot projects funded by the European Commission that try to implement Saref and provide feedback. And so Interconnect is a large-scale pilot project that is using Saref a lot. Omega X in the domain of the energy European data space. Yeah, so that's a picture of the history of Saref. Next slide, please. Okay, so we use the Etsy governance model. So we use documents and revisions of documents and work items to work on documents. So it's a very heavy process, probably similar to what you can find in other standard development organizations. In the end, Saref is a set of versioned ontologies published in Etsy technical specifications that are versioned. So we have a set of domain-independent reference ontology patterns. At least one Saref for systems is already published. We are working on other ones. One core ontology, which is in version 3 right now, and different extensions for verticals. So now the documentation is available and published on that website, saref.etsy.org. And these Saref ontologies are referred to by different catalogs, but that's not really part of our publication process. Next slide, please. Right. In terms of, we have a technical specification that is totally dedicated to the definition of the development framework and workflow. So we specify who are the actors there that are in charge of the steering committee for the development of Saref and the different extensions, the ontology extension developers, these kind of things. Who is in charge of the infrastructure? Everything is written there. We also define 3 different workflows. One for proposing a new Saref extension or a new version of an existing Saref extension. One for developing that Saref project, we call that, and one for releasing it. And finally, this document also specifies how should a repository that contains a Saref extension, how should it look like? So what should be the different folders and the turtle files that you may find in there, the documentation, the examples, these kind of things. This document also specifies what would be the metadata on the ontology. So we mainly use all metadata on the ontology, DC terms, van, and also what should be the metadata on the terms. We mainly use RDFS and specify that there should be language tags, for example, and at least one in English. You have here a screenshot of the metadata on Saref core. And next slide, please. All these all these you should, you may, you must, etc. Well, not you must, but you shall, are also tested automatically with a pipeline, the SAREF pipeline software that assures the quality of the semantic artifacts and generates the documentation. So it checks the conformance with that technical specification. We use it either using a GUI, CLI, or in the continuous integration and deployment pipeline. So we do enforce the reuse and imports from other semantic artifacts in the SAREF ecosystem. And we also decided that we would reuse a couple of existing ontologies developed by also standard development organizations like SOSA SSN, Alltime, GeoSparkle. All the feedback and issues are discussed on the Etsy labs, but there is an issue there. We only those who have an Etsy account, so those who are members of an Etsy member organization, can actually log and contribute there. So there is some kind of a battle here that we are leading to try to open that to the rest of the world. The SAREF pipeline will be presented at the International Semantic Web Conference this year. So if you're there, you can chat with me about that. Next slide, please. All right, so we use a BSD3 license that's imposed by Etsy. Maybe we'll adopt another one in the future if we want to open up to the rest of the world the contributions to the portal. So that's what I'm writing here. There is ongoing discussion to allow individuals to contribute too. We don't have a machine accessible endpoint available, just the terms and ontology versions are available, and we have a term lookup service. We don't communicate necessarily with the ontology users. We don't get them notified because, well, we could rely on the GitLab, watch features, but only Etsy members can log in. And financially speaking, the sustainability of the ontology is done through actually the European Commission or Etsy directly, and by academics mostly. So the maintenance is funded by Etsy. So that's for the portal for the GitLab and the portal where the documentation is published. And actually, new work items are being taken up by industrial associations. For example, the European Lift Association, in particular, fearing now that the European Data Act is soon enforced, published. Next slide, please. Okay, maybe there is no more slide. I think that I had just one last slide about the life cycle. Rita, thanks. Regarding the maintenance, our work is based on funded task forces and lead to the publication of HCTS documents. So we have one rapporteur per document or per release of a document and a group of experts behind. We work on the Etsy lab, so that's an instance of GitLab, but due to sovereignty issues, they didn't want to call that the Etsy GitLab. Okay, they may switch to another solution in the future. We discuss issues and we try to get agreement by each participating institution on every issue before we start implementing a solution for that. The general workflow is described in a technical specification. And regarding retirement of obsolescence of terms, I should say, we use deprecation when we increment the minor or the patch. And we may delete terms altogether if we increment a major the major part of the semantic versioning of an ontology. The versioning is managed using version branches on the Etsy labs, and versioning is also managed using redirections on the documentation portal. So if you try to access to Saref Core, you will be redirected to the latest version of Saref Core. And so I'd say that's it. Maybe just one last slide, the stakeholders and decisions. So Saref development is supported and governed by the European Commission and Etsy Smart M2M Technical Committee through funded projects and its Etsy specialist task forces. As a summary, yes, the ontology is composed of a set of modules that are individually versioned and the object of Etsy technical specification documents. So we inherit the very strict governance model of Etsy on the formal side, and on the development side, well, we have those workflows that are defined, and we academics, well, have regular meetings to decide on the decision that we need to make. But actually, because of this way of organizing the work, we have quite a few modeling discrepancies and redundancies. So we are currently working on trying to ground the development of the next version of Saref, the major revision of Saref and each extension, on patterns that will be instantiated. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxime. That was the past also very interesting. Thanks for presenting. And I didn't get your sentence at some point. You said we don't have an ontology repository, or we do have an ontology. Did you say we do or we don't?
Well, we don't. Part of our publication process, we don't push our work or new releases to existing ontology repositories. That's something we don't do.
Okay. And you don't count or rely on a specific service that you will have on your side for that. You confirm that.
On our side, we rely on continuous integration and deployment, and we push to our own server, well, a server hosted by Etsy that I manage, for publishing the documentation of the ontology that is generated automatically from the sources, and that's it. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting side question, and well, thanks. I mean, we'll take that as the last presentation, because this is already, of course, 10 minutes after 6:30, and we want to make it longer. And as the last one is also recorded from IMA, so we're not going to play it. We'll be sure we send that information to you. So and I see also the numbers of person also decreasing now because of the timing being passed. So I just don't want to hold more people for too long after the presentation. I know it's a little weird also to do it like that, but I think the fact of organizing this moment where we all go together, we have those registrations and then people coming up to make is also a moment where we took to all talk and present that. So at least even for the speakers, I think the feedback and the presentation from the others will be useful, and I hope it will be also very useful for the participants online that are not speakers. We thought about maybe keeping some time for discussion there, but we're gonna probably pass on those aspects and also do our homework to parse all your inputs. You have so many lines that are interesting also in your presentation that will come and address for sure. So I think that's going to be it, unless we have a important question. But I've been monitoring the chat and the questions in the last minutes, and I don't think we have seen big aspect. I mean, Chris, you just say thanks. Governance is an absolutely interesting and important topic, and a good choice for the structure of the speakers. ISO 19135 procedure for item registration for some models. Currently, we are working on a revised version. And yeah, so thanks for pointing that out. And we do think, I mean, thanks for also being here, Chris. We were happy to have some representative from your group, Chris, Romain, but also the fair assessment and quality group. And also, I know Chris and you and Romain are also in a project also associated to the reflection around semantic artifact governance. So I think it was important also for you to kind of hear a bit of that. So please stay tuned to Fair Impact task 4.1, sorry, it's the end of the day also for us, and we started early. We'll produce some stuff there, try to do our work. We might and trying to consume also the proposition that the speakers have presented today for sure. Yeah, some of the speakers have also included that thing, and I confirm we'll also be able to transfer the content as I said before. If someone does, is there anyone who wants to say something like 2 minutes before we wrap up? I mean, I see Louise hands. Eventually there was also another hand. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions from the crowd before we close it. Or was that disappear? Or
there is a hand raised from Roberto Rovetto.
Yeah, okay, hold on. We have 2. Yeah, let's go ahead. Louise and Roberto will raise their hands, and we'll be able to after that close it, I think.
Only see Roberto, not Louise.
Oh, I've seen Louise also raising her hands, and so
but
Roberto.
I don't see it anymore.
Oh yeah.
I'll go for Roberto then.
Go ahead. I think I allowed you to do that now. Discussion autorisée. Yeah, you should be able, yes. And Louise should go after.
Oh, is that me?
Yes, Robert, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I think I raised, too many maybe topics 1 to 6 in the question. I was wondering if anyone found any topic of interest, since there were a number of points that are either directly or tangentially related to governance. So if there's anything of particular interest, I'd be happy to expand on it, even if it's offline.
Louise? Louise might be gone. Are you gone, Louise, or Louise? Well, no big deal. Okay, well, so speakers, thanks again for doing the exercise of presenting. We will apologize offline to Ima of cutting off her presentation that she recorded for us, but we'll be sure that's transferring. We've seen a different types of governance, different approach with like, yeah, from specific project, very mature, very from companies. Also, SAREF was also useful with the vision of a standard, or let's say that a group of standardization for companies like that. So I think it was also an interesting example. So we've seen also diversity of tools. I mean, onto-portal installations were mentioned, also OLS mentioned. So we see that's also an important aspect for us in our package 4 in Fair Impact, to feel that the semantic artifact catalogs, the tools play a role in the context of the governance, and how we can enhance or find that goal in order to cover the life cycle of the ontology and semantic artifact development and then sharing. So that's going to be also a useful aspect for us, and I think we've seen also a bunch of reference to different standards or norms, like some ISO that in which it would be interesting for groups to cross-fertilize and let one the other know, like that. So those are some of the outcomes I have on my notes. One of them is between OMO, GOMO, and MOD. I think we still have a little work to do in terms of ontology metadata. So it's a personal message to me and the people working on ontology metadata description that we still have things to work on, that to be sure we harmonize that. So I was aware of OMO, of course, and MOD that we work on, but I did a new GOMO at in the policy of GOMO. GOMO did actually implement the metadata vocabulary, so we'll follow up on that. If that's okay, I want to say thanks again, and we'll close it and call it a day.
Thank you, Clément. Thank you for organizing, Clément and Nina. That was really very interesting.
Yep. Thanks, Baptiste. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Clément.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.